Ciao e benvenuti a questo quarto incontro della rubrica in residenza a casa di. In questa puntata andremo in visita virtualmente in Francia a trovare Christina Towle, che è una coreografa franco-americana che lavora a Parigi, direttrice artistica di Kibuko Compagnia e artista associata della programmazione di Regard Du Cygne. Questa intervista sarà fatta in inglese, quindi sarà un'occasione per chi ha voglia di fare un po' di pratica sull'inglese. Hi Christina, how are you?
Hi, doing well as can be.
Yes, as I said before, we are virtually traveling to France to meet you. For those who don't know you, you're a choreographer. You live and work in Paris, but you are originally from the States.
Yes, I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, but now pretty soon I'm gonna have lived maybe half of my life in France and half of my life in New York. So
Wow.
the New York was the first 23 years, and then the rest has been in France.
Okay, so it's half and half, really, almost. Um, can you tell us a little bit before we start going into the subject of um, artistic residencies and how the performing arts system works in France, which is a subject that interests us a lot because we're just set up a program of artistic residencies in Teatro della Cittadella in Aosta. So we wanted to have an overview. We will meet in this encounter with you and in the following appointments with different people who work in the field, just to see how things work in other places. Can you tell us a little bit before we get into the subject about what has been your artistic path as a choreographer in the States, and when you got to France, how did it change and how did it develop?
Well, I did my training in New York at the Merce Cunningham School, but also I did classical ballet before. And I did basically most of my training as a dancer was in New York. I did also go to Barnard College dance department, and so I have a diploma in dance and also in English literature. And then my professional life has really been in France, actually. And it was very difficult, I think, all transitioning from the United States to France because the system is so different. In New York, everything is basically self-produced. And so the systems of, I mean, there is grants, but everything is everything is self-produced, and even with grants, the majority of the financing for projects is fundraising and philanthropy. So that was a big change, and also the dance styles was a big change for me. I think that I thought that I was a contemporary dancer before coming to France, but then when I was in France, I realized I was actually just a classical dancer that had done some modern dance. So that was a little bit of a shock, but I got over that shock and went to a lot of dance classes in France, and also did a lot of yoga, which helped me to, touch the floor, which I realized that in Cunningham technique, we don't touch the floor. So I had a long way to go from vertical to a horizontal. But at the same time, what's very interesting when you come to Europe is that actually there is, of course, the dance landscape is very rich in France with many choreographers and many beautiful structures for supporting dance, but also we are close to Portugal, we're also close to Italy, we're also close to Germany, so that we're able to also have a lot of other influences in dance. I mean, it's really, I think Europe is probably the center of contemporary dance, so that's why I stayed. So I worked with, I didn't always choreograph. I taught actually basically for about 12 years when I arrived. And it took me a little time to actually really start creating choreographic projects. I went to a place called Fondation Royaumont for formation, dance training which was actually it was over 3 months. It was for training choreographers with a woman that's has a very radical choreographic style, but that's very well constructed and precise. And her name is Miriam Gorfink. And so this was sort of a turning point for me. After that, I really started creating. And so my company was created actually not so long ago, my own company, because I co-directed a company for about 3 years. And so my first piece was in 2000. Well, my first piece was really in 2011. And then 2012, 2014. So I've been creating now for about 9 years. And I'm working on a new project that's called Bounce Back. And I have just started also working as the programming director at a small but very historical choreographic center in France, in Paris, which is called the Regard Du Cygne.
Yeah. And how is let's say the production path for a choreographer who's setting up a production, so a performance which is going to be diffused around in various theaters and festivals? What is the production process like in France? How do you approach? Are there any institutions that give funding? Are there residency centers that promote and support the artistic practice? What is the situation?
Well, I guess maybe it's a little bit responding next to the question, but to make a parallel, because it was difficult for me actually to understand the production process. It took me really a long time. Luckily, I actually did some training programs to sort of get a handle on it, because it's very kind of, I guess, it's not, I wouldn't say secretive, but it's not that easy to really understand how to proceed, especially when you come from New York, because in New York, things are very immediate. You know, the production, it's like you have an idea, you go into a studio, and it like takes 3 months, you know, and your piece is done, you know, and it's not this sort of, and the thing is actually what I've learned, and I actually really enjoy this, is that in France, it takes a really long time. It takes very long, for example, and the longer that you take, actually, the easier it is to get the production, because that's the way that the production constructs itself, is really over maybe two seasons, over 2 years of time, between the time that you actually get into the studio, you start getting the financing, and you go all the way through to the production. It's really long, and the longer that it is, the easier it is to meet all the deadlines, which are totally sort of, you know, you're always having a hard time getting into the calendar of the production grants, and the longer that it spreads out, the easier it is to be in the right temporality for the calendars. So that took me a long time, I guess. So that, how is it done in France? I would say that this is more like my advice. This is how I've managed to do it. I don't really know how. I mean, surely other choreographers do it. I'm somebody that's that has grants for specific projects. I don't have yet grants for just for employing my administrator and stuff like that. We basically work just
for the current activities. So
for the current activities of the company.
But there are both.
Yes, there's both. Okay. In general, you have projects, specific projects, funding for that. It's called aide au projet. And then you would have something that's more like aide à la structuration, which means helping you pay for your company. Somebody working for you, the administrator, the diffusion. So companies like me, we work more. I have to take out a percentage of everything that we do to be able to have support, so that I'm not doing all the work, basically. Or at least that I'm having people that are competent in administration helping me to know what to do. Which is
quite vital for a choreographer. I mean, in Italy, there is a lot of the companies have to carry out many roles into the company.
Yes.
So it's the fact that there is a support for the administration and programming work is, for you, it's like time left to do your research and to do your residencies. How much time do you think, in percentage, in like perspective, do you spend in artistic research even before you get to a production state?
Well, I would say I'm a little bit. I've been able, for the last two projects that are the most mature projects. I don't know, mature or the most elaborate or sophisticated projects. I've been able to get funding for the research period, which doesn't necessarily cover all the research period. But for example, I got writing grants in 2012 from 3 different structures, but they're sort of one-shot grants, so I couldn't have them again, but I got them for the first project. So I was able to finance it. And then for the next project, I got a financial a grant from the department that I live in to work in a conservatory, which also had an element of just research. There was a lot of outreach, cultural outreach and workshops, but there was also really money for just at least maybe the money was more like for 1 or 2 weeks in the studio, because it was really more to do with the students. But it did allow me a space and support over 1 year to work on the project. I think that in general, I would spend about 6 weeks in the studio before the project.
Okay. So that gives you time,
which is not necessarily paid. I wouldn't say all of it. I would say that I guess it's more like me as a choreographer. I need 6 weeks.
Yes, of course, because production times are very different for every artist. I mean,
and maybe you manage to get half of that financed, or but then some of it. Actually, one thing which I don't know if it's the same way in Italy, but at least it's not the same way in New York. And this is something that I don't think that most French people realize, is that it is quite easy in France to get space to work in that you don't have to pay for it. Whereas in New York, sometimes people are chosen to pay for a very prestigious studio. And that's like, you're already really happy that you got chosen to be able to pay to work in the studio. It's totally ridiculous. Because people in New York, they're nomad. They can't just like stay in a space for a whole week and leave their costumes and their decor. They're always moving around, and they have like really small work times, like 2-3 hours. It's not like in France when you get a residency, you can basically work normally from at least 10 to 6. And then sometimes you have the space all to yourself. So if you want to leave materials, costumes, boxes, music, you can sort of really camp out, which is, essential, I think, to creating projects. Like, for example, I'm doing a project that's about basketball. So I have a lot of basketballs right now of different sizes, and I have at least 12 of them. And I think if I had to bring my basketballs with me every time to get to a place and back, and if I had to carry around 12 basketballs all the time, I'm not quite 100% sure that I would really have the energy to always have my 12 basketballs. And that would probably totally change the piece, about what.
Yeah, totally.
Change.
There is a residency system. There are like a national network of residencies. I think in Italy the system is much more oriented towards a production process rather than an artistic research. There are very few residency spaces that support artistic residencies for research only, but it has to be oriented towards a production. So this shortens up the time for artistic research, which means that it's not that you're forced to, but you're strongly oriented towards producing something that is maybe safer because you have less time to think about what you want to do. So that's I think the space to have artistic research for something that you're still not sure what direction is going to take is quite important to get to go a little bit outside your comfort zone, let's say.
Well, I think that in France, though, that they have the system that you're an association or not. I mean, for the United States, it's also not for profit. But the thing is that sometimes you can be sort of also off the grid to do your research. I mean, when a project is just in the beginning, you know, you don't necessarily have to be in France. They have many dance studios all over the place. They have you know, the Maison de Quartier, they have the conservatory, they have sometimes in schools they have a dance space. And sometimes you don't necessarily, like if your association is in a certain town, you could also just try and have space in a conservatory to just be able to
At least this is public places. I mean,
yes, but I think that, but actually in France, actually, just to come back to the idea of the administrator, in my experience, my own personal experience, in France, which is not really fair, I think having an administrator is not a choice. It's so essential because it's so complicated. It's administrative way, it's so complicated. And I myself basically racked up about a $9,000 debt because I didn't know how to do the work correctly. And it wasn't because I didn't want to do it. It's just so complicated. So it's a little bit difficult because I think that so many companies in France, you know, maybe you can't have an administrator, but it's like so important because it's too complicated. And then the thing is, and then if your administration is not done by the books and done thoroughly, it'll totally block you in the grants process. You can't do anything. If you don't have the paperwork that they're asking for, then you're just blocked. So it is a little bit frustrating, but the first thing I would say is that in France you have to have somebody that's doing the administration, and I think it's difficult to find. I actually do a lot of the communication because that's what I enjoy doing. I decide what I enjoy doing, but I do do a lot of administrative work. You know, but I like writing the project proposals. I like writing the plans for, you know, the outreach projects. And I like doing communication. I like doing Facebook, Instagram, and everything like that. But basically, I'm doing it. I do my website. You know, but so you have to choose what it is that you enjoy doing, what it is you can't stand. You know.
Besides being a choreographer, you're also associate artist of Regard Du Cygne, as you said before. Can you tell us a little bit about what is it? What is Regard Du Cygne and how?
The Regard Du Cygne is a historical. It's a very beautiful place. It's a old. I know the word in French, but I'm using it in English. It's an old barn. A barn. It's a barn that used to be for horses, and it was bought by a collective of artists in 1983. And it was really one of the first places where there was contemporary dance. So it's small. It's one studio theater. It has enormous amount of charm and an enormous amount of history. And basically, I think that everybody that dances in France has rehearsed there at one point. Well, at least in Paris, I guess France maybe. But we have two festivals. We have a festival in autumn and a festival in spring. And we support emerging artists. We support also intermediate artists, as you say, people that have, you know, mature work behind them. We have also started doing some young young audiences performances, and it's been a wonderful experience for me. It's been a strange experience for me also to be on the other side of the artist theater relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Because as an artist and a curator in some sense, how do you think this has changed your work as a choreographer, or vice versa? How do you think your being an artist contributes to the programming view, the view, that the vision that is proposed in your programming in Regard Du Cygne?
Well, I think in certain ways, there's been a really nice harmony, because I do sort of think about when you construct a festival, it's an artistic object in itself. You know, you try and find things that are coherent, echoes, themes, innovative ways of showing things, so it's artistic. But in another way, I think that it I realize how hard it is for programmers, actually. It's really hard because there's a huge demand, huge. And actually, I did say this. I don't think I'm depressed anymore, but it did make me a little bit depressed, actually, in the beginning. I felt that I realized how much pressure there is on programmers and how many people are asking for being presented and needing to be presented. And it made me a little bit sad, actually, to be quite honest. I felt like, oh my God, this is such a hard field. Everybody, you know, but at the same time,
there is so much offer. There is so much.
There's so many people wanting to create. There's so many people, and so it's. I think that it took me a little while, but what I had started doing was I made my own grille. Well, you feel as an artist, there's certain things that count for you, and there's other things that don't. And as a programmer too, you know, maybe what I think is really important is that the project is really anchored in a body research. You know, the writing of the body is what is in the foreground of the project. You know, sometimes people will come on video and theater and you know, art plastique and everything like that. But then I realized that I really want to have propositions that are just about what the body is writing. It's also because it looks good in our studio. That's the sort of project that looks good. It's a small studio with a lot of character, and big theatrical forms it's not really appropriate. And then also to realize that that my personal, what touches me is when I really feel that the project is connected to who the artist is as a person, which may sound weird because, of course, maybe you think that it always is. But when you feel that it's a real necessity, that it comes from the soul of the person, that this project came, and that it's not just the project, it's also the person. So it's very personal, actually.
So that kind of personal that can be collective because it's honest in some way. And I guess it takes time and a space and a time to understand what is your artistic trajectory as an artist.
Yes.
That's why I guess these spaces are important. As you said, you give support in residency, I believe, or you also have financial programs about the support of the production, and that, I guess, it's a very important part of the
Regard Du Cygne is actually quite specific, because we do give co-production, and we do give residencies, but in very specific conditions. We don't give residencies because we're actually a space that is also financed by by a private economy, meaning that we rent out the studio. So we rent it to people. We rent it to a lot of people that do music because it's a beautiful acoustic, and people that give classes. We have classes in the evening and classes in the morning. So the thing is that sometimes, we have a certain number of hours that we give out, but we don't give out like the whole year long. We don't have artists. And in general, we choose artists that we know that we are going to support for our festivals. And the festivals, they're quite small, so that means that there's not a lot of artists that we can support really over a year.
But you follow them through.
Well, yes. If there's not an engagement somewhere in the project to give them visibility, in general, we don't give them studio space, which is always a little bit hard because you don't know what the project is before they've rehearsed it. And then
it's a challenge for you. I mean,
yes.
In choosing there is some part of risk in choosing what you want to support. Regard Du Cygne is also part of a network.
Yes, indeed. It's a part of a really beautiful network that's called the Paris Résidence, which unites Mikadance, l'Étoile du Nord, la Télé de Paris, qui a aussi CDC, a Centre de Développement Chorégraphique. In France, we have, I don't know the exact number, but it's about 12 Centre de Développement Chorégraphique, which is that's very lucky because in Paris, we have 2 Centres de Développement Chorégraphique, and we also have the Centre National de la Danse, and all these places give residencies and studios.
What is the function of the CDC?
Alors, la fonction du CDC, c'est de promouvoir. Je travaille pas de. No, to support the art of dance in outreach, giving workshops, master classes, diffusion, research, especially also la briqueterie, which is the other CDC. They do a lot of livres, books and research projects and expositions.
Academic part.
Right. And diffusion, and also producing festivals. And that's true that for that we're also very lucky in France, and that's new. Maybe, I don't know, 15 years maybe, I don't know, but it's something that's quite recent, at least in the past 10-20 years, that's made for dance. So we're very lucky. And Paris Résidence, we choose 2 artists a year to support, and 1 artist to support over 2 seasons. So we have about 2 or 3 artists all the time. And one of our priorities at the Regard Du Cygne is to support these artists. This year we have 2 great artists, Kevin Jean and Nina Vallon, that we're supporting. So we work a lot with them. And also Mie Concompo, her company, that we're supporting until 2022. 22.
And then, 22. And then the pandemic came, and so what happened? How did your structure, your organization react to this situation? What is the situation like now in France for the artistic sector?
Well, I have to say that I feel it in 2 ways. I feel it as an artist, because I am confronted with the same, I think, stress and worried. I mean, the artists, they're very worried, because everybody doesn't know financially what the repercussions are going to be. Everybody doesn't know when things are going to open up. They don't know when the festivals are going to be able to go on or not go on. I mean, there's a lot of blind spots. And so the artists are sort of, I felt it in the beginning, now that they've sort of calmed down. But in the beginning, everybody was sort of trying to consolidate and reassure themselves that certain projects were happening. So on the Regard Du Cygne side, everyone's like getting in touch with you for stuff. And as from the structural point, from my position at the Regard Du Cygne, we just don't know what the next few months are going to bring. So you're in this sort of inactivity, because you can't respond to anything. Our whole team is working in different places geographically. We all have kids. We're all trying to take care of our kids at the same time as we're working. We're able to maybe try and have a meeting once a week together. And it's sort of a context in which you can't give any sort of sure response to any artist. So I feel that's really frustrating, because the artists are trying to make sure that everything is going to happen as it's supposed to be happening. And from the structural view, you just can't. You can't do that. You can't reassure them, and you just can't say that things are going to happen, because you don't know, as your structure yourself, what is going to happen. What is going to happen? We've lost a lot of money at the Regard Du Cygne, because, as I said, we rent. So we've lost a lot of money, and we don't know, maybe will the festival be canceled? Will we have to cancel residencies? Are we going to be allowed to have people dancing in our studios? I mean,
yeah, totally.
So it's difficult because I feel that artists want to be reassured and you just can't.
It's
At least from our perspective.
a situation where for everybody you have to live in the present. So for programmers, and the word says it, and you can't program anything. It's just you have to go with the flow and see what it's
Yeah, I mean,
about.
at least
In Italy, there are some now proposals arising from cultural operators about the future of the performing arts in a different configuration, in a different form. Is there a discussion about possible potential different forms of theater in France too?
Yeah, well, the president talked yesterday about everyone was waiting for him to talk about what was going to happen for the cultural sector, and it was not specific. I mean, he said certain things, and it's not yet specific. We don't really know how it's going to translate, but it seemed to me like, I mean, it wasn't really offering very much help. He said that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves, reinvent the sector, reinvent the way we program, reinvent, it's like, yeah, I'm reinventing with what money, like, and the fact that I said that the projects there for like 3 years, they take so much time to produce. It's like, well, what do you do with the artists that are producing a piece for, a stage that's, 20 meters, big and for 2,000 people? What do you tell him? Reinvent your project, make it so that you only need to have 10 people in your audience and you're solo. It's like, I mean, you can't reinvent things that are already happening. I mean, I think that people, of course, in the future, we can reinvent, I could, for a new project, my new project, luckily for me, was already for public spaces and sort of a small configuration. But the thing is, I don't think that people are worried about how to reinvent. That's not a problem. I think the problem is, what do we do with projects that are going to totally
already
die or not be able to be presented, or that's the real problem. I mean, I think about people, because some choreographers, that maybe had a premiere, for example, in autumn of 2000. The premiere is in autumn, and all of their rehearsals were between May and September, and it's for 10 people. What do you do? I mean, it's like that. It's a disaster. So I think that maybe people were sort of wondering more, what are we going to do for the projects that are already happening? If we all are going to know that you have to do solo pieces for big spaces, then that's no problem. I'm sure that we'll have a lot in 2021 and 2022, but it's not right now.
This situation will shape the new face of choreography in the next years, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think that the new technology dance will also explode, and I think that that's great. It's not exactly what I love to do, but I did some at other places, dancing in virtual spaces. But it's true that these sort of projects, it's the right time for developing them.
Yeah.
The president also said that he wants that the people that go into the school system, which is totally bizarre to me, because people already do a lot of cultural outreach. But it was basically, that was what he said. He said, we're going to pay, you need to go into our schools, our kids, they're not going to have vacation. The whole school system is going to be upturned, so we need to send artists to schools, which, is nice for people like me who actually like a lot to do cultural outreach, but not everybody's made to go and teach kids. So it's a little bit strange, I don't think the teaching outreach for kids is everybody's talent. So I don't think everybody should go to schools.
Yeah, totally. And plus, I mean, this was already happening in France, because there is a very rich network and of programs of outreach in schools already, which, for example, it's not totally lacking in Italy, but it's left very much up to the single organization. It's not centralized.
Yeah, well, here it's not centralized either, but there's definitely more funding, and it's more. I think that there's probably more school directors that decide to engage for having dance in their schools, but it still does sort of depend on the school director and his desire to have dance or not. But what is a little bit ridiculous is that they've been reducing financing for cultural outreach projects in schools for probably the last 10 years, progressively. So it's sort of a little bit paradoxical that now it's the same thing with the hospital system. It's like now all of a sudden it's become a priority. You know, it's like, well, maybe if it was such a priority, that's funny. You know, you wouldn't be taking away financing for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that also I had to cancel a period of residency at the end of this month for my next project, because, you know, how do you make a project when people are supposed to be 4 meters away from each other and not touch and wash their hands every 2 seconds? And, you know,
that poses also a question about this, the health and safety of the dancers themselves.
Yeah.
A big.
I'm an employer, you know, and so then what it comes down to is that if anybody was going to get sick, it's your responsibility. So then you have to, you know, and also it wouldn't have been a productive week for me if I can't have my dancers touching each other.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, or if I wasn't able to exploit the week so that it was beneficial for my project. But
okay.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Christina. We have one last question that we always ask to all our artists. If there was one thing you had to choose among all those things that you can't do, that are not there now in this period of social distancing and of closure of many structures, and so this has changed the way we live right now. If there was one thing you wanted to choose not to come back,
not to come back,
what would you choose?
Not to come back. I would like that teleportation exists, and that the distance, because for example, now I didn't have to go to Italy to talk to you. I didn't have to do any travel, and the virtual spaces opened up. I wish that everything took no time to get to, and that you could totally take out transportation time. I say that because, you know, what's very funny is now that they have so many classes online and so many things to do that you don't have to go anywhere. And I do value the human above the virtual. But for example, I was discovering, because I've always been very curious about Gaga dancing, but I never took the time to go to do it. So now, you know, I'm able to just discover it, you know, from my home, which I don't necessarily think is the best thing. But when you have children and you know, work constraints, it's a little bit difficult. So if transportation time could just not exist,
yeah,
I could just go to any theater at any time.
From A to B in no time. It would be perfect.
I could just do the baguette magique, and I'd be at the Teatro de Chaillot, and then I could come home without any subway time.
That would be perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best for your
Thank you, and good luck. Good luck to everybody in Italy. I know it's difficult for everybody, and I hope that we're all. I mean, even though I would like to just not have any transportation time, I hope that we're all able to see each other physically quite soon, and dance together and show dance together.
Okay. Peace.